Every week an actor will ask me, I don't know how to learn lines. And I'll say, okay, there are some techniques here that we can look at. I used to find it really, really easy to learn lines. So this has never been something that I've struggled with. But I think my understanding of learning lines comes from my musicality. So if that is your bent, if you are a musician, look for the musicality in the phrases, and what's going to help you here is the punctuation. If you mark the punctuation marks just as you would as a musician, you know, what does that pause mean? What does this particular thing mean? What's that little musical signature suggesting? It's going to be a lot more helpful to you as an interpreter of text, because you're now looking at an underscore, if you like, of musicality. And in fact, I used to write my own music back in the day and put a backing tape on to learning lines. So I never used to put lyrical content in, because that would just confuse me with the memorisation activities I was doing in relation to the text. But I find that ambient music in the background is a really, really good way of learning lines. So if you do yoga, if you do any kind of meditation, you might want to import some of that meditative music into your line learning process, so that there's this calming element going on in the background as you're doing the fairly tense business of chunking up the lines and learning them, probably at speed. Some actors find chunking up the best way of learning lines. Learning a line at a time, hiding line 2, revealing line 2, hiding line 3, revealing line 3, and saying lines 1, 2 and 3 together. And when 1, 2 and 3 are together and you're really sure about them, adding in 4 and 5 and so on. I'd never found that particularly helpful, because I find it really difficult, and you might be the sort of person who learns in the way I do. I can't learn lines without intention behind them. So I would have to know what I was physically going to be doing with those lines if I was going to be able to remember them. So I always attach physical action. I know that Ian McKellen, for example, is this kind of an actor. When he was interviewed recently about how he remembers lines, because he remembered Hamlet in his 80s, he was asked how he'd managed it, and he said, well, I do this act of memorisation called story recall, where he imagines he's walking down a street and every line represents a door, or every idea within a text, every unit, if you like, within the text represents an idea or a front door. So he'd go to the red door first, and he would know through memorising that and placing that group of lines behind that door, when he opened it, what would be there, and then moving further down the street to door number 2, opening the yellow door perhaps, and that next unit of thought is hidden behind there. He actually integrates imaginative storytelling alongside the act of memorisation for the text. It's interesting, and your mind might work tangentially like his does, but give that a go, see if that actually does work for you. You can work in teams. It's great to have an accountability partner when you're learning lines, so you can get someone to read your lines in for you. Or you can record the whole thing and keep playing it back. We spend a lot of our lives, don't we, with headphones on or earpieces in, so it might be worthwhile just recording the whole lot and then remembering it back that way. The danger of that, of course, is if you're working with a professional voice teacher, or your acting coach or your director wants you to speak a line in a particular way, and you've auditory captured it and you've remembered it in a particular way, it might be very difficult for you to get out of that vocal pattern. That would be my only word of caution on that one. Things that are going to help you to remember your lines. You might want to use an underscore. You might find it easier if you're in a state of meditation, so you might need to turn the lights off and just listen to yourself recorded, speaking backwards and forwards the lines. You might want to work with an accountability partner, someone that can read in the lines for you and coach you when you don't get it quite right. Or you might just want to do chunking up, a line at a time. Stanislavski's concept of units and objectives really helps in the memorisation of lines. Because once we know what our attitude is towards the things that we're saying, we can ascribe an action. And if you can imagine yourself moving through space from one place to another, doing a particular thing, motivated by a particular objective or a desire or a want to do that very thing, it becomes a very, very easy thing to recall. If they're just lines floating about in space, disconnected to performance, that's when this act of memorisation becomes really challenging. They're not connected to anything. They're not written on the body. I really recommend you try that granular work of breaking up the text into units and objectives, deciding how you're going to say something and what that's going to look like in terms of physical and psychological action on stage. That's going to really help you to remember what you're saying and in what particular sequence. If you think you can and you think you can't, you're right. And the same goes for line learning. If you think that the part of Hamlet would be absolutely beyond your acts of memorisation, you'll be right. But if you think you can do it, you're also correct. It's about the way you program your mind. And highly resourceful and highly successful actors who have longevity of career, are highly inventive in the things that they do in order to get the results that they need. When things go wrong for them, they forget their lines, for example. It happens a lot on stage. They don't punish themselves by thinking this is a failure. They think, okay, what's the feedback? I haven't got the right technique behind this. I'll try something new. Never be afraid to experiment. Remain curious throughout your acting career, and it will pay dividends.